Watch closely. This is the trick that built a $9 billion company. A drop of blood on a fingertip, a tube the size of your thumbnail, a sleek black machine that hums and thinks and prints a result, and a room of powerful people who applaud. What that room does not see is the side door at the back, where the same drop of blood is carried out to a full-size machine built by somebody else. The device on the stage did not run the test they just watched. It never could. For a decade, that was Theranos, a company the whole world believed worth more than $9 billion, built on a machine that did not work, running live on the blood of real sick patients. The promise was the most seductive in medicine. One drop of blood from a finger, not a needle. And from that single drop, over 200 laboratory tests. In reality, the machine she built could run about a dozen. The woman selling it was Elizabeth Holmes, a Stanford dropout in a black turtleneck with a low, steady voice and pale eyes that reportedly almost never blinked. By 2015, Forbes called her the youngest self-made female billionaire in America, worth $4.5 billion on paper, about $6.3 billion today, and her machine was already open for business, drawing blood from real sick people in Walgreens stores across Arizona. Here is the trick that decides this entire story. The machine she named the Edison was marketed to run more than 240 tests. The handful it could actually manage, it ran erratically. Everything else, Theranos ran in secret on ordinary commercial analyzers made by a competitor, Siemens, diluting the tiny finger stick drop to make it fit, which made the results worse. Holmes admitted the Siemens substitution herself years later under oath. This is Kings of Nothing. The fifth file in our ledger belongs to a queen, and her empire was the most modern kind of nothing there is, a story. Elizabeth Holmes did not steal a crown or forge a deed. She sold a belief to investors, to generals, to statesmen, and finally to the sick, that a machine existed when it did not. Tonight, how the illusion actually worked. The board of war heroes who guarded it. The one drop of blood live on real patients. The young insiders who burned their own lives to stop it, and a verdict that should trouble you more than it comforts you. The stamp on this file does not say genius, it says negative. To understand the lie, you have to understand how badly she wanted it to be true. Elizabeth Holmes grew up comfortable and hungry, the daughter of a man who had been an executive at Enron before it collapsed into one of America's most famous corporate frauds. She reached Stanford at 18 to study chemical engineering, and she arrived certain. As Carrie Ruud tells it, asked as a child what she wanted to be, she answered, a billionaire. Treat that as the story her family tells, but the wanting is not in doubt. She wanted to matter enormously, and to never be the kind of person who couldn't. Her idea was a small device. Draw one drop of blood and let a machine run the tests a whole laboratory runs. She took it to two Stanford professors. Phyllis Gardner, a professor of medicine, told her plainly it would not work. You cannot reliably run that many different tests on that little blood. Channing Robertson, an engineering professor, was dazzled, lent her his name and joined her board. Holmes kept the yes and buried the no, and she built her whole life on one revealing rule, which she said out loud for years. The minute that you have a backup plan, you've admitted that you're not going to succeed. So, she built a founder who could not fail. She dropped out at 19, rolled her tuition into the company, and named it Theranos, Therapy and Diagnosis. Then she studied the most worshipped founder alive. She wore a black turtleneck, the exact style Steve Jobs wore. She hired away Apple designers, and called her device the iPod of healthcare. She adopted a low, deliberate baritone colleagues said she'd sometimes slip out of. And when the first machine failed and failed, she named the next one after the man famous for failing 1,000 times before the light bulb, the Edison. The voice was a costume too. It would be the last piece to come off. Now the science, the heart of it, and the part the experts always get right. A blood test is not one thing. Different tests need completely different methods: spinning, chemistry, antibodies, light. To run over 200 of them, a real lab uses room-sized machines and full tubes of blood. You cannot cram all of that into a box the size of a printer and feed it a single drop. To even try, you must dilute the drop, and dilution multiplies error. The chemistry itself made it impossible. Theranos' own chief scientist, Ian Gibbons, knew. As early as 2006, he warned the tests were not accurate. He told his wife plainly, "Nothing at Theranos is working." For years, none of it mattered. No one outside the company could check. Then, September 2013. Theranos stepped into a household name, Walgreens. The deal put its blood tests inside the drugstore, eventually more than 40 wellness centers, almost all in Arizona. And the machine that ran about a dozen tests badly went live on the public's fingertips. This is the door closing. The difference now was the stakes. A failed prototype in a lab hurt no one. This was a machine drawing real blood from real patients inside a drugstore. 9 months later, Fortune put Holmes on its cover. This CEO is out for blood, and the persona was public and permanent. Behind the cover, here is what the machine actually was. Former employees described Edisons whose parts fell off, whose doors wouldn't close, that couldn't hold their own temperature. On a good day, it ran a handful of tests badly. So Theranos did the thing that turns a failed startup into a fraud. It faked the demonstration at scale. Patient blood meant for the Edison was run in secret on modified Siemens machines, with the fingerstick sample diluted to fit. The results went to doctors and patients stamped as Theranos technology. The revolution was other people's equipment in a locked room, doing worse work than it would have done alone. And when the science wouldn't cooperate, Holmes manufactured proof. Theranos handed investors validation reports that appeared to carry the logos of Pfizer and Schering-Plough, as if those drug giants had tested and blessed the technology. They hadn't. Holmes admitted at trial she personally added them. She told investors Theranos would earn $100 million in 2014. The real figure was about 100,000, off by roughly 1,000 times. She told them the US military was using Theranos devices in the field in Afghanistan. The Department of Defense never used Theranos at all. These were not optimistic guesses. They were, in the SEC's words, a massive, years-long fraud. So why did anyone believe her? Look at the board she built. Not scientists, statesmen. 2 former secretaries of state, George Shultz and Henry Kissinger. A former Secretary of Defense, William Perry. A future one, the Marine General James Mattis, who believed so completely he put in his own money and offered to serve for free, telling her, "I believe in what you are doing." Senators, an admiral, a Wells Fargo chief, one of the most decorated boards in American corporate history, and almost no one on it knew the first thing about blood science. It was a wall of medals standing guard over a box that couldn't read a drop of blood. With that board vouching for her, the money came in a flood, and none of the biggest investors commissioned a real technical check of the machine. Rupert Murdoch put in about $125 million, some $175 million today, the single largest investor. The family behind Walmart, roughly $150 million. Betsy DeVos's family, about $100 million. Oracle's Larry Ellison invested too. Safeway sank $350 million, $500 million today, remodeling 800 stores for clinics that never opened. Walgreens put in around $140 million. At its peak, Theranos raised more than $700 million, about $1 billion today, at a valuation past $9 billion. The media finished what the board began. Forbes, Fortune, Inc., Time, cover after cover, one calling her the next Steve Jobs. On the Forbes cover, she held a tiny vial of blood up to the light, exactly the way Jobs once held up the first iPhone. She visited the White House. She gave a TED Talk with a mission so pure it was almost impossible to doubt. A world in which no one ever has to say goodbye too soon. And when a reporter asked her simply how the technology worked, she answered, "A chemistry is performed so that a chemical reaction occurs and generates a signal from the chemical interaction with the sample, which is translated into a result." It meant nothing. Almost no one noticed. Inside the real laboratory in Newark, California, the two truths sat side by side, gleaming Edison boxes staged near the front. Behind them, the competitors' machines doing the actual diluted work. When Vice President Biden toured, the company reportedly built him a spotless fake lab to walk through, hiding the room where the real testing happened. Federal inspectors would later use 4 words that never appear in a press release: immediate jeopardy to patient health. One of the failing tests measured how thin a patient's blood was, the dose that keeps a clot from killing them. A wrong number there could cost a patient their life. But that reckoning was 2 years away. First, the crown. Look at this again. A clear tube, half an inch tall, 1 bead of blood. Not a diagram, the actual object the whole empire balanced on. Now meet the first person who refused to look away from it. Erica Chung was 22, a Berkeley graduate, a junior lab associate. She watched Theranos' quality control checks fail over and over, and watched the company run patient samples anyway, using what insiders called outlier deletion to throw out the bad data and keep the good. She said the thing that cuts to the center of all of it. Even though it was a tiny vial of blood, every vial was a person. When she left, she wrote a letter to the federal lab regulator. But the first cost had already been paid, quietly, before the first store ever opened. Ian Gibbons, the chief scientist, the man who had warned for years that the tests weren't accurate, was scheduled to testify in a lawsuit against Theranos. The night before, in May 2013, he took a fatal overdose. He was 67. According to his widow Rochelle, the company had pressured him. And when she called to tell Theranos he had died, Holmes did not call back, but a Theranos lawyer emailed asking for his confidential files and his company laptop. The cause of a death is not ours to rule on. The timeline is documented. His widow's grief is hers to speak. By 2015, the illusion reached its summit. Theranos was valued at more than $9 billion, close to $13 billion today. Elizabeth Holmes owned half of it, $4.5 billion on paper, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. $9 billion, the market price of a demonstration that could never be run a second time. At the very moment the world valued her at $9 billion, the machine that earned her that crown was live in an Arizona Walgreens, taking blood from a pregnant woman named Brittany Gould. Brittany Gould had lost pregnancies before. This one she wanted with everything she had. She gave 1 drop of blood at the drugstore, as the ads promised. The Theranos test came back saying her pregnancy hormone was falling. the signal of a miscarriage. Then it said it again. For days, according to reporting by John Carreyrou, she believed she was losing her baby. A conventional lab retested her blood the old way. She was fine. She carried a healthy child to term. Her body had never betrayed her. A machine had. Now, multiply that one drop of blood by 175,000 Arizonans, and you have the other half of this story, the half the money hides. The people who stopped Theranos were not its brilliant board. They were kids. Tyler Schultz first met Elizabeth Holmes in his own grandfather's living room, his grandfather being George Schultz, the former Secretary of State, the anchor of her board. Dazzled, Tyler joined the company out of college. In the lab, he saw what Chung saw: failed quality control, cherry-picked data, a machine that didn't work. He raised it inside the company. He was rebuffed, so he quit, and he became a secret source for a Wall Street Journal reporter under a fake name. To do it, he had to go to war with his own family. That reporter was John Carreyrou. The whole investigation began almost by accident. A skeptical pathologist called him with a doubt, and Carreyrou later said, "Without Adam Clapper, I am almost 100% sure that I wouldn't have done anything." What he found, Theranos fought with everything money buys. It hired the superstar litigator David Boies, who also sat on its board, to threaten the paper and pressure witnesses. And Holmes went straight over the reporter's head, to the one man who could kill the story, Rupert Murdoch, her single largest investor, who happened to own the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch, with $125 million on the line, declined to interfere. The pressure on Tyler became a scene out of a thriller. Invited to his grandfather's house for what he thought was a private talk, he found Theranos lawyers waiting in a back room, pressing him to sign statements naming other leakers. He was told signing would end a world of suffering. He refused, and his grandfather, the war hero, the statesman, chose Holmes over his own grandson. Tyler put it in the words that hold the whole tragedy. He had made the decision to choose Elizabeth and Theranos over me. It cost him an estimated $400,000 and 2 years of his life to hold that line. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published it. The machine did not work, and Theranos was running its tests on other companies' equipment. It should have ended there. Instead, Holmes went on live television and looked the country in the eye. This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. Inside headquarters, she reportedly had staff chant against the reporter. What she no longer had was the one thing the whole empire required: the benefit of the doubt. Because now the regulators were inside. Erica Chung's letter had reached the federal lab agency and triggered a surprise inspection. In January 2016, the agency found conditions at the Newark lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. The FDA had already ruled the little nanotainer tube an unapproved medical device. And of the more than 200 tests Theranos marketed, exactly one had ever been cleared by the FDA, a herpes test. The machine that was going to democratize medicine had, in the government's eyes, one legal product and a laboratory dangerous enough to shut down. Then it fell all at once. Theranos voided or corrected 2 full years of blood test results. In Arizona alone, of roughly 1.5 million tests sold to 175,000 people, more than 1 in 10 had to be thrown out. The company later refunded the state nearly $5 million. Walgreens tore up the partnership and sued. Regulators revoked the lab's license and barred Holmes from the industry. And Forbes did the coldest math in business journalism. It cut Elizabeth Holmes's net worth from $4.5 billion to zero. By 2018, Theranos was formally dead. The reckoning split in two. First, the civil case. In March 2018, the SEC charged Holmes with a massive fraud for raising all that money on false claims. She settled without admitting or denying it. A $500,000 penalty and a 10-year ban from leading a public company. Then, the criminal case. The Justice Department indicted her on two conspiracies, one to defraud investors and one to defraud doctors and patients. Hold on to that split. Holmes stepped down. And after years of delay, in the late summer of 2021, she walked up the steps of a federal courthouse in San Jose to stand trial. The woman on those steps did not look like the founder on the magazine covers. The turtleneck was gone. The platinum bun was down in soft waves. She came as a defendant, small against the stone, through a gauntlet of the same cameras that once made her a god. Inside, the persona met the record. Prosecutors put it simply, she chose fraud over business failure. Her lawyers answered, failure is not a crime. For 15 weeks, the jury heard from burned investors, from the generals and staffers she had deceived, and from the young employees who had tried to warn everyone, Erica Chung among them. Then, Elizabeth Holmes did the rarest thing a defendant can do. She took the stand for 7 days. She admitted, in her own words, that she had personally added the Pfizer and Schering Plough logos to those reports. Her explanation, this work was done in partnership with those companies and I was trying to convey that. And then, the closest she came to the truth, I wish I had done it differently. She also testified that Balwani, her secret partner, nearly 20 years older, the company's president, had emotionally and sexually abused and controlled her. Balwani denied it through his attorney, and even she conceded that he had never forced her to lie to a single investor. And one by one, the wall of medals came down. General James Mattis, who had believed so completely, who had called what she was doing breathtaking, took the stand for the prosecution and said, looking back now, I'm disappointed at the level of transparency from Ms. Holmes. The board had been the proof. Now, the proof was testifying against her. Everything she had built to be beyond question was now being questioned under oath in open court. On January 3, 2022, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict that is the reason this story sits in our ledger. Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts, every single one of them for defrauding investors, the rich people who funded her, and on the counts of defrauding patients, the sick people whose blood she tested, she was found not guilty. The law had no trouble believing the billionaires. It could not bring itself to convict on the patients. Sit with what that means. Brittany Gould, told by this machine that she was losing her baby, was among the patients, and the jury acquitted Holmes of defrauding her. Every vial was a person, Erica Chung had said. Sunny Balwani, tried separately, was convicted on all 12 counts, including the patient counts Holmes walked free on. So the harm to patients was real enough to convict the man who ran the lab. Just not, in Holmes's case, something the jury would pin on the Queen. In November 2022, the judge sentenced her to 135 months, 11 years and 3 months. Months later, he ordered her and Balwani to pay $452 million in restitution to the investors. The largest single share, $125 million, is owed to Rupert Murdoch. The same Murdoch who had already sold his entire Theranos stake back to the company for $1 to write the loss off on his taxes. On May 30th, 2023, Elizabeth Holmes reported to federal prison camp Bryan in Texas to begin her sentence. And then the last piece of the costume came off. In 2023, sitting for her first interview after conviction, Elizabeth Holmes spoke to a New York Times reporter in a voice that was soft, a little low, and completely unremarkable, with no trace of the deep, commanding baritone she had used to run Theranos. The Turtleneck, the unblinking founder, the iPod of healthcare, the Edison, all of it had been a costume built around a machine that was never there. When the company died, the voice quietly went with it. What was left was a person, in a small voice, who had convinced the world she was something she was not. So say it precisely the way the record allows. The $9 billion was never the price of a breakthrough. It was the price of a demonstration that could not be reproduced, a company running its miracle on a competitor's machines, while it told the world it had made them obsolete. The Edison ran about 12 of the 240 tests it advertised. The rest was marketing, the slogan, the turtleneck, the practiced calm. An empire valued in the billions that never actually existed. Which brings us to tonight. Elizabeth Holmes is 42 years old, and she is in that Texas prison camp right now. She has run out of courtroom. In February 2025, a federal appeals court upheld her conviction and her sentence in full, calling the one-drop promise exactly what it was: a mirage. Weeks later, the full court refused even to reconsider. With good behavior and federal credits, her release has crept up to somewhere near the end of 2031. She could serve roughly 6 more years. Roughly. Because one document could erase those years with a single signature. As of early 2026, a petition asking President Trump to commute Elizabeth Holmes' sentence sits inside the Justice Department, marked in the official record, pending. The White House will not comment. The president has not acted. He has, though, granted clemency to other white-collar offenders. The woman who spent a decade selling a machine that could see the future is now waiting on a single page she cannot read, on a desk in Washington, unsigned. And until it is signed, or isn't, the youngest billionaire the fraud ever made sits in a camp in Texas watching the door.